I think there's a long history in Republican presidential administrations of seeing the education department a bit differently than others. Ronald Reagan famously campaigned on eliminating the education department altogether. So Linda McMahon was in the first Trump administration as leading the Small Business Administration, which is not exactly a high-profile position, but still a cabinet position. And now, as someone who has stayed with Donald Trump, not only during his time out of office, but also being a major supporter of him during the campaign, has now been rewarded with a more high-profile position. With that said, it's still unclear what exactly her policy priorities would be in the Department of Education. The U.S. education system is famously fragmented, so still a lot to be seen.
Yeah, of course, and one of the things that might be seen is the complete abolition of the education department, because that's what Donald Trump wants. He wants control to go elsewhere. So what might we see happen with Linda McMahon in that respect?
Yeah, I think Republicans for some time have definitely wanted a decentralization of the Department of Education. For many decades now, there's been a fight between Democrats and Republicans about the way that public education has gone. Republicans have famously wanted school vouchers. They wanted to give parents more choice. If their local public school is not performing, they want those parents to be able to choose to bring their children to a better performing school. Democrats, on the other hand, saw that as a way that would ultimately weaken public schools and allow for basically a worse outcome for everyone. And that debate is actually, as much as there's been a lot of change in politics in recent years with Democrats and Republicans in many ways reversing positions, this is one area where I see a lot of actually continuity from prior debates in prior generations.
Now, moving on to the other topic, Dr. Oz, nominated to lead the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. On paper, perhaps he looks like the person that has the most amount of experience in the role they're being chosen for.
Yeah, on paper, he may appear that way. He famously in the U.S. has been, as you said, Dr. Oz. He's a well-known figure, someone who really was in a lot of American homes for giving all sorts of diverse types of medical advice. With that said, then he ran for Senate as a pretty conservative Republican and a Trump-endorsed Republican in 2022. And him losing that race ultimately was a sign that many took as Donald Trump being sort of diminished as a politician. The fact that his endorsement, his strong endorsement of Dr. Oz did not translate to an electoral win in Pennsylvania, which is, not a super progressive state. It's a swing state, and arguably one of the most consequential ones for the U.S. presidential election. So the fact that Dr. Oz lost was telling that maybe Donald Trump wasn't the great political heavyweight that everyone expected, but ultimately it seemed like in the end he himself is a political heavyweight, but his endorsements may not be as consequential as he hoped they would be.
And if he is nominated into that role, what sort of impact could that have on the Affordable Care Act, formerly known as Obamacare?
Yeah, I think it's really important to highlight the difference between the executive branch and the legislative branch. So the Affordable Care Act was done through legislation. And so there's only so much that the executive branch can do to basically get rid of it. And one thing that they did during the Trump administration is they got rid of some of the penalties that the executive branch was doing for those who did not enroll in the Affordable Care Act. It's still too early to tell what exactly more they could do to it. But at this point, I'd highlight that actually, on the whole, public approval of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, has continued to grow over the years. When it was passed during the Obama administration, it was quite controversial. But since then, it has only grown in popularity. And so I have to wonder just how likely it is that they could get rid of that option altogether. It's only affects, a few dozen millions of Americans, not even close to half of America. but still is something that Americans know as an option, as a fallback if they need it.
Yeah, I was asking also in the context of Republicans now dominating both the House of Reps and the Senate. But are we thinking that there are Republicans in both houses that would continue that support given the level of popularity there is for the Healthcare Act?
Yeah, so I would highlight the fact that the Republican majority in the House isn't a very large one at all. It's significantly small. It's just a few seats. We're still waiting to know the exact amount, but it's not going to be more than 6, 7 seats altogether. It's probably a lot less. And whereas in the Senate, they have a 3-seat majority and a 100-seat Senate. So they don't have the largest of margins. They can only afford to lose a few Republicans. And as I said, given just how popular the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare has continued to grow over the years, I'm not sure if Donald Trump can get rid of it altogether. Let's not forget that he tried to get rid of it during his first term, and John McCain in the Senate decided to not allow the Trump administration to do that. And so it's still too early to tell what exactly they would do. Also, it's still too early to see what exactly the Trump administration and Republicans propose as an alternative. They've had many years to propose an alternative and have yet to see one fully fleshed out just yet.
And Jared, what can we expect in terms of the nomination process in the Senate for Trump's first picks? Can we expect any fireworks in that respect?
Definitely. I think there's some who will go by almost unanimous approval. Someone like Marco Rubio, one of their own, the Florida senator, who's seen as more of a conventional Republican personality on foreign policy, a well-known pair of hands. You have other people, including Elise Stefanik as UN ambassador, maybe a bit more controversial than Marco Rubio, but I still think she passes without any major issues. But then you definitely, I think, will see some fireworks for someone like the Attorney General nomination, Matt Gaetz. He is someone who is probably one of the most controversial people in all of Washington. We might remember the dramas around the Speaker of the House for the Republicans and how dysfunctional they were. He was in many ways central to that because he did not want to support Kevin McCarthy, the prior Speaker of the House. And he continued to be a thorn in the side of one Speaker of the House, one Republican Speaker of the House after another. So I think he is probably the one that the Trump campaign is already thinking may not be able to get approved on the whole, but that doesn't mean that all of their candidates will face anything close to his level of challenge by their fellow Republicans.
And Jared, just a final question on foreign policy. Now, Joe Biden has pretty much upped the ante with allowing Ukraine to use long-range missiles, the ATACMS missiles, to hit Russian targets, and reportedly it's already happening. How complicated is that going to be for Donald Trump when he's promising to end the war within 24 hours when he steps into the role?
Yeah, I think the Biden administration is basically giving the Ukrainians what many Ukrainians and Ukrainian allies had wanted the Biden administration to do for many years. And so I don't know if it completely changes the dynamics on the ground because Ukraine was already striking many sites in Russia using other weaponry that they did not receive from the United States. So I'm not sure if this is a complete and wholesale change from what was going on before, but ultimately I still see the Trump administration view of Ukraine not changing all that much. Ultimately, they want it to basically be resolved. And more than anything else, they want this European land war to remain a European one in which the NATO allies themselves put more resources in than the United States.
Okay, Jared Mondschein, always good to get your insights. Thanks very much.
My pleasure.